Hey everyone, my name is William Leonard, your host for today, and this is the Virginia Startup Podcast. I'm really excited to be joined by Boomer Muth, who is the CEO and co-founder of Koalifi. Boomer, welcome to the Virginia Startup Podcast.
Yeah, thank you for having me, William.
Yeah, Boomer, I want to just jump right in and get into the Boomer story and your arc of choosing Virginia, thinking about the journey and trajectory of your career as a new graduate and how you started on your founder journey. So I'll kick it over to you to just dive right into that.
Okay, yeah. Well, William, I'd say my journey as an entrepreneur started when I was about 14, and me and a couple buddies had decided we wanted to start a band, um, but none of us knew how to play instruments, and so we decided what instruments we were going to play and essentially learn them together. And I think not dissimilar from entrepreneurship, this is really what we all do when we take that leap. We say we believe we can do something that we've never done before. And so getting to see what a group of us could do together, we learned our instruments together. We were playing our first show a year later. At our first show, we actually got thumbs downs. People were booing. It was pretty bad. But we still kept deciding to push through that, which I think is kind of the definition of grit, of believing in yourself enough that the outward perception doesn't change your drive. Um, and eventually, we actually people started liking us, and people would come to our shows and come see us. And you know, just like entrepreneurship, you had to learn how to sell your product. Um, you had to constantly refine the product based on the feedback you're getting from the crowd. And and we were doing well enough that the reason I chose Virginia Tech to go to was a couple reasons. One, everybody in the band agreed, and we had in our mind we decided we were going to be rock stars, and everyone agreed that we could go to Virginia Tech together and keep our journey together. And then my dad told me that he would. I was fortunate; he would pay for college if I went to school in engineering. And if I wasn't in engineering, he would not pay for college. And Virginia Tech had an engineering school. So kind of was able to achieve both things at the same time. Now, a few years into college, um, we were doing pretty well as a band. We were touring quite a bit, getting some attention, and it was distracting from school. So we as a band agreed that we were going to take a year off. We got our parents to agree. We could take a year off just to focus on the band. Uh, and all of our parents said, you can do this, but you have to pay your bills. And so, hey, this was my first experience in business. We had to market ourselves. We had to make sure that fraternities and bars were paying us. Um, and so we just toured up and down the East Coast playing shows. And it was just a great experience. And in hindsight, I realized I learned a lot about entrepreneurship through that. Well, we didn't really take off. We didn't become rock stars. So went back to school, finished school. And then after school, I went to Capital One. And Capital One has a great culture. Um, I think they were doing things that were completely reinventing what could be done in the credit card space. And if you don't know Capital One's story, it's kind of important for the kind of the Central Virginia area. And we'll get to Startup Virginia later. Capital One's a big sponsor of Startup Virginia, which it really helps entrepreneurs now. But Capital One essentially looked at the credit card space and took first principles thinking to say, we're going to, instead of hiring a bunch of finance majors to use off the shelf credit scores, we're actually going to hire engineers and statisticians to get as much data as possible to build the most intelligent models that we can underwrite consumers differently than others. And really, Capital One came off a local bank called Signet Bank, and now is, I think, one of the four largest banks in the country. And it really is because they looked at the problem differently. So there was a lot of entrepreneurial thinking at Capital One. Now, 4 years into my journey at Capital One, this was probably around 2006. I realized that I wanted to be an entrepreneur, but I didn't know any entrepreneurs. So I went to the people that I was surrounded with, which were my coworkers, and I said, I want to start a company, and I have this idea for a company. It was a senior home care company where we had caregivers go in to seniors and help them with everyday things that William, you and I might take for granted. And and my coworker said, "Man, it sounds like a great idea, but it sounds really risky. You have a great thing going here, right? You have a team that reports to you." I was 26, 27 at the time, and I was making good money. And they said, "Man, that sounds really risky." And I listened to them. And so I decided to start my business while I was at Capital One. And I started a senior healthcare business called Home Helpers. And what happened over the following 6 years is I did two things in a mediocre way. Uh, my career at Capital One plateaued because I was distracted with my business I was starting. And I ended up selling my company 6 years later for half of the money that I had put into it. And by the way, I never paid myself anything over those 6 years. So financially, that would be defined as a failure. Um, but a wonderful learning experience, right? You're either winning or you're learning. And I wasn't winning for those 6 years, but I was doing a lot of learning.
Yeah.
And so that was kind of my first foray into entrepreneurship. Um, and so after that, William, well, here's what I'll say. I learned both. If you have to be focused,
Mhm.
right? If I had gone all in on Home Helpers, it probably had a much higher likelihood of success. But I'll tell you the most important lesson I learned was from our clients, because our clients were seniors and towards the end of their lives. The big lesson I learned about entrepreneurship is if you want to do something, talk to people that have actually done it. I didn't know any entrepreneurs, so I talked to my coworkers. I was absolutely talking to the wrong people, right? Show me your five closest friends and I'll tell you who you are. I
Right.
wasn't surrounded by entrepreneurs, so I wasn't going to become an entrepreneur. And I
Yeah.
think that hits on a lot of the things that we're going to talk about later on in this.
Yeah.
Um, but then my other big lesson is life. I got to talk to seniors who are at the end of their lives. And I started realizing a theme when I had conversations with them. Nobody I ever talked to regretted something that they tried and failed at. The only thing I ever heard regrets about were things they had never ever tried. And this was almost like an unlock for me. Um, because there was a client and he said, I retired a little early. I was 55. It was a little more tough financially, but I always dreamed of writing a book. And he said, I wrote it to write it, and only 40 people read it. But he was so proud. He pointed over at his bookshelf and he said, "But there it is." And he had this huge smile on his face, right? And you know, he might have defined that before he started as a failure, but at the end of his life, he said that was what I always dreamed of doing, and I did it.
Yeah.
And so I had this revelation that everything that society is feeding us is BS, right? They say, don't do that. It's risky. It's scary. The real risk in our life is not taking a risk,
Yep.
because that is what we're going to regret at the end of the day. Um, William, I'm doing a lot of talking. Is this
No.
is this some of the stuff you
No.
wanted to hear about?
Yeah. In Boomer, that is so interesting. And that's one of the things that I was told before I went to college was take risks while you're young. And the biggest regret that a lot of people had when they did get to their 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s was that they were reflecting on the risk that they didn't take early on when they had the ability and the energy and the bandwidth to do. And so what an interesting story, Boomer, going from high school to starting a band to Virginia Tech, dropping out, going back to school, and then going to Capital One. Curious to just hear, thinking about the arc of that story in your early career. Was there a moment, a defining moment where you said, my experiences from being in the band, going to school, dropping out of school for a semester, and then going to start a home healthcare company, and now thinking about finance and fintech and how you can unlock access to credit for people with subprime, non-prime credit. What was the moment for you where you said, I have to go out and start Koalifi? There's no, I can't wait any longer. I have to start right now.
Yeah, that's a great question, William. And it sounds like you had some great mentors in your life to tell you to take those risks. Um, I I think it's really wise advice. And I would say it's not just when you're young. I think it should never stop. Um, Now, on that, I don't think I got introspective until pretty recently. So I don't think I actually was thinking much about my journey and how I got there. But something happened shortly after I sold Home Helpers. Um, Capital One laid me off. And to tell you the truth, William, they should have. My heart wasn't into it. I wasn't providing the value to them that I should have been providing. And they laid me off. And it was just a phenomenal gift because so much of us as humans, we just do today exactly what we did yesterday. And and we're going to keep doing that same thing every day unless some outside force pushes us to change. And that outside force was this wake up call from Capital One that said, hey, you need to take a real hard look at what you're doing with your life. And that's how I interpreted it. Now, luckily, it was the second time I'd been laid off, so I was able to interpret it that way. The first time I got laid off 6 years earlier, I really, I took the first job I could find. And hey, sometimes you have to make those mistakes to learn. This time I said, I am not going to jump to the first job I can get. I'm going to take this gift to be introspective and say, who do I want to be? What do I want to do? And I got introduced to my two co-founders, Rob and Scott. And in meeting with Rob and Scott, they had the idea for Koalafi. They had the idea for the business. They said, listen, we realize that in the point of sale finance space, when customers go into retailers and they can't get approved for traditional financing, they don't have an ideal experience. Most of the players in the space aren't intelligent around machine learning, underwriting the consumer in an intelligent way to help reach and access more consumers. And that means retailers are missing out on sales and customers are missing out on purchasing the product they need in their life. And in addition to that, we talked together and said, and also in the point of sale finance space, particularly non-prime, most of the players just aren't super transparent with the customer. And most dissatisfaction in our lives, in your life, William, and my life, is because our expectation is misaligned with what happened. And so we said, if we can enter this space and be super transparent with the consumer and also underwrite in a really intelligent way, we can offer a differentiated product. Now, I think part of my entrepreneurial journey and some of the stuff I shared with you leading up to this is where we actually started agreeing on what our partnership would look like. Initially, they wanted to offer me stock options and a reasonable salary to actually start the company for them because they had a consulting firm called Second Order Solutions that was doing really well. And they said, we want you to start the company for us. And I'm going to condense months of conversations into, just one conversation. And got to a point where I asked each of them, well, how much money are you putting into the business? They told me, and it happened to be about exactly what I could pull together in cash if I borrowed, money from my, 401k or from places that I had access to. And so I essentially said, well, if I can put the same amount you guys are putting in, can I be an equal partner? And they said, sure, we didn't know you had that kind of money. And I said, I'll pull it together. So I really went all in because I knew from lessons I had learned before that my odds of regretting that were really, really low. What's the worst thing that can happen? Well, my most powerful asset is me. It's me, my experiences. I can go work for someone else.
Right.
And so going all in on Koalifi was one of the best choices I ever made, because as soon as I did that, I got really, really uncomfortable. And I was forced to learn a lot of things that, had I gone down just a traditional path, I wouldn't have been forced to learn.
Yeah. And Boomer, you and I were talking about a couple weeks back of just finding a wedge. And it sounds like the wedge for you all was a differentiated customer experience. And so you join these guys as an equal partner. And I'm curious to hear, just Boomer, coming from a more technical engineering background, one of the challenges that a lot of founders face early on, angel, pre-seed, seed, even into series A, is growing through founder-led sales. Curious to just hear your thought process and how you overcame that learning curve of coming from this technical background to now learning enterprise founder-led sales.
Yes, that was an interesting journey, William, because back in high school I was a mathlete. I was thinking in numbers, thinking in very quantitative terms, and yeah, obviously going into engineering as well. And I had a belief going into starting the company that almost, if you build it, they will come, right? We will build the best product, and that will mean that we will win. Um, my first few sales, because in the beginning of the company, I was doing every role. So I was just driving up and down Broad Street, which is kind of a main street in Richmond, stopping in furniture retailers. And I'd walk in and I'd say, "Hey, we have the best machine learning algorithms. We're going to help you make sales." And they would just look at me like with a blank stare, because they don't know what that means. That means nothing to their world. It all I did was I walked into their store and started spouting a bunch of stuff that was about me and about what I was building that I was super excited about, but they don't understand. It took me an embarrassingly amount number of visits. It was probably 100 visits before I had this unlock where I said, you know what? I'm not even going to tell the person what I'm doing. I'm just going to walk in and ask a bunch of questions. And I walked in and I said, I happened to get the owner of the store. And I said, "Hey, what can you tell me about your financing that you're using right now?" And he goes, "Well, honestly, we're really happy with what we have." And he started walking me through everything about their financing. I said, "Okay, well, tell me more about why you like them." And just got really curious. And if you ask somebody what they really like, they'll eventually start telling you what they don't like, if you're just patient enough to listen. And when you find out what they don't like, that's when you find out what you should actually start talking to them about. You going in and having this presumptive notion that you know what your customer cares about is one, very egotistical, which I was in that moment. Um, but two, it's a waste of energy and a waste of time, because you're just going to talk about a bunch of stuff that the person doesn't care about. And
Right.
so there's this unlock of, wow, I need to get the customer to talk about what their pain points are. And that requires curious listening. And finally, he told me what the pain point was. He said, they're asking for a big discount. When this financing company buys it, they're going to buy it from me at 94 cents on the dollar. And now I knew the margins we could have in this product. And I said, well, what if we just paid you the cash price of the item? And he said, oh, well, now we're talking, right? It only took one sentence for me to say, walking in and talking about everything I cared about. I started talking about what he cared about. And so that was my big unlock. And I would say probably a bunch of entrepreneurs don't realize this, but your job in sales is to, one, do a bunch of reps. And that means going out and you're going to get a bunch of no's. And that means you get right back up and you go again, and listening curiously, because then your customer is really going to design your product for you.
Right. I see that. And product and customer discovery is one of the most important critical things that we're seeing even more prevalent today in today's day and age, as with AI, it's been so prevalent that people are building solutions in search of problems versus figuring out the problem first and then building a solution, much like you did through reps, customer discovery, or like we call it, shots on goal. And so, that's one of the key unlocks that you've had, Boomer. Curious to hear what other key and non-obvious insights and learnings as a founder did you have from the early days of building Qualify? You've raised over $190 million now for the company. There had to have been some interesting key unlocks and learnings from that journey. Give us more insight into that.
Yes. I think a big key insight was that you can move really fast in the beginning when you get access to every aspect of your product. And this is a really beautiful, I mean, I still romanticize about the times in the beginning because I was answering every customer call, every merchant call. I was doing the data analysis to figure out what we were seeing in our customer behavior. I was in our portal figuring out what each customer was going through, talking to the customer, talking to our tech team on how to build the product to improve it. And so I had this unique point in time where there wasn't a bunch of communication across multiple people. The communication was inside of my brain. And that is because communication is difficult. Building out a model and an organism with multiple people involved that communicates effectively and moves together is a very challenging part of scaling. It's an important part, but in the very beginning, you have this beautiful time where you know exactly how everything works and how it fits together. And there's just beautiful innovation that happens when that starts happening in the beginning. And
Yeah.
so when you start thinking about scaling, how do you continue to replicate that? How do you ensure that there's trust amongst the team and you're communicating actively, continuously? William, it's still something that we think about every day. It's kind of our most important job as leaders of the organization.
Yeah. Boomer, that's awesome insight, man. And I just have a tangential question to that, kind of off the cuff, but you talk about moving fast in the beginning when you're so involved as a founder with every aspect of the business. I mean, you kind of have to be. You probably had a 3 to 5 person team. You're touching every aspect of the product. How do you know when a product is working early on? What are the signs that this is repeatable, scalable, and that our customers are actually going to adopt and use this product?
Yeah, it's interesting, and it is it is more obvious than you might think, right? Because when you're talking to the customers, you can hear it in their voice. And so that's why it would be important if you are founding a company in the very beginning, you absolutely have to be talking to your customers because they will show you the surprise and delight. And if you don't hear any excitement when you get on the phone with them, probably means something's not quite right. Because in the very beginning, you're going to be bending over backwards for them. And so the combination of you bending over backwards for your customer and the product that you're building meeting their needs should create almost ecstasy in your customer.
Mm.
And it's not only that, but then you also start seeing referrals. The person that I told you about, the story I told you where I finally learned to listen, he was part of a network of 40 different furniture stores up and down the East Coast. And about 2 months after we started running with him, he goes, I got to tell my buddies about you guys. And he set up a meeting where we could go and talk to every single one of them. And all of them signed up. The ones that didn't sign up shortly after because they started talking about it. And so if you don't have your customers talking to other people in the network, they are networked with other people in their industry. Sharing your product with others and you don't hear the excitement in your voice, that's probably how you know that you're not quite there yet.
Right, right. No, Boomer, I want to continue the conversation and continue to move it forward here. So, one question I have for you is just around the broader uh, ecosystem and experience that you had with Capital One and how that really helped influence your experience of building Qualified, taking that operating at an enterprise level as an engineer to now operating as a founder serving the enterprise. What did you learn from Capital One that sort of seamlessly translated to your time as a founder and CEO of Qualified?
Yes, I think the most powerful thing Capital One provided was a structure for logical decision making. Um, Capital One um, is something in the early days they called information based strategy, right? Um, a statement without data is just an opinion. And so learning that data is your best way to understand everything you need for a logical decision, I think was probably one of the most powerful parts of our learning. And me and our other two co-founders, Rob Finnegan and Scott Barton, they were executives at Capital One. So each of us having that thinking of we're not going to decide the next thing until we have information. If you can create quantitative data, it makes it a lot easier. But also understanding that qualitative experience is another form of data. But always using what we actually see to determine our path forward was probably the most powerful thing that Capital One delivered for our journey.
I love that. And Boomer, you've been in Virginia for the majority of your life now, it sounds like. And you've been able to see the ecosystem grow and elevate while you've been actively building a company. And I'm sure looking retrospectively too, it's even more exciting of the growth of Virginia. How have you seen this ecosystem evolve? And what is the most exciting thing that comes to mind when someone says, "Hey, I'm building in Virginia. This is what I want to do."
Yes, Virginia, and I'll speak mostly to Central Virginia, which is where we started Koalifi, and it's also where I live, so I'm more familiar with the ecosystem. When we started 10 years ago, there wasn't much of an ecosystem. And if I could go back again in time, I would have networked with other entrepreneurs a lot earlier. I think that me and our other two founders, we kind of learned together, and thank goodness we had each other, right? If we hadn't had each other, it would have been impossible without a network in the community. Um, but I wish I had networked more with entrepreneurs in the beginning. We didn't have a place to, our first 5 months was at Panera. We would meet at Panera to decide what we were doing. Then we thought we had enough revenue to sublease a conference room from a local accounting firm. And so we were just sitting in a room every day, looking each other face to face. No huddle rooms to go off of for meetings. Um, Now there's a wonderful infrastructure in Virginia. You have Startup Virginia, which is in the 1717 building. Capital One provides a lot of funding for that. And that is a phenomenal ecosystem, right? It provides you co-location with other entrepreneurs and wonderful networking opportunities, but also allows you a space to work and shared space as well. You've got Lighthouse Labs, which is also another phenomenal firm. For Black entrepreneurs, you have the Jackson Ward Collective, which is doing some great things in the community to help entrepreneurs grow. And then you have a couple of early angel funds like the Trolley Venture Fund, who invest only in Virginia companies. Activation Capital, which is really focused in the biotech community, but is really helping the entrepreneur group. And these are five firms that 10 years ago just didn't exist. And if you were starting a company in Virginia right now, I would say the first thing to do is talk to all those five of those companies and really start getting involved in the entrepreneur community. There's another group that meets regularly. I think it's called Encorepreneur in Richmond, and these are networking groups as well. Entrepreneurs want to help other entrepreneurs. And another thing that has inspired us at Koalifi is realizing that we didn't have this in the beginning. We have a lot of people that join our team. We tell them when they join, we're going to make you uncomfortable. And that's our gift to you, because there's no story of growth without discomfort. And part of that is we have an entrepreneur group we started over 3 years ago. Every month, either an entrepreneur or early stage investor comes in and talks to our team that is interested in being entrepreneurs. We've done it 3 years running now, an entrepreneur startup competition where they come in and pitch ideas. We take no ownership stake in it. And the winner gets paid for 3 months, but they only work on their idea. And if at the end of 3 months they decide that they're ready to make the leap and jump and leave, we celebrate it and we, cheer them on.
That's awesome.
We've had
How
a
can
great
founders
track
find out
record.
about that?
Yeah. What's that?
Yeah, how can founders find out more about that? That sounds like a really interesting program that could be beneficial for many of the listeners for this podcast.
Yeah, well, if you're interested in working in a company that supports that, go to Qualifi's website, look at the open jobs. So it's only, Qualify employees that get to take part in that. But I'm excited to celebrate our first winner 3 years ago. He went on and got venture capital. I think he raised like $3 million at a $10 million pre-money valuation and is doing great things. Our next founder, it was a year ago she won. She's already making more money than she was making here. And then our new co-founder, our new winner, she is still inside of her 3 months, and I get the chance to meet with her every 2 weeks and find out how her and her partner are doing. And they're built a social media consulting firm, and called Legacy Marketing, NM Legacy. And so it's really cool to watch. I think that's our responsibility. If you see some level of success, I think that your responsibility to society is help others find the same. And so helping others be the best version of themselves is really important to Qualify. And I think important to a lot of entrepreneurs.
Yeah. I love how you, in tandem with a lot of the state programs, are building this foundational flywheel of entrepreneurship and encouraging people to take the leap. I think one of the big things that holds people back is, that fear of taking this leap and not being paid or compensated, and worrying about covering bills and the what ifs instead of just going out to take that leap. So the fact that you all are kind of creating this bridge to entrepreneurship is awesome. And as you think about the work that you're doing along with many of the state programs and funds as well, what is Boomer's big vision for the entrepreneurial ecosystem in Virginia?
Yes, I wish I had the time in my current role to spend more time with the ecosystem. Um, but I will not be in this role forever. And I would like the majority of the remainder of my life to be helping other people realize their full potential. And particularly in this risk-taking entrepreneur space. Um, a lot of us walk around with limiting beliefs, right? We believe there's a lot of reasons why other people can do things, but we can't. Um, and honestly, it's BS, right? I think the story of humans is the story of people not living up to their full potential. And so helping others realize that you're going to fail along the way. And that is the only way that you learn. And the key that sets people successful up from others that don't is they get back up. They don't say, I guess I wasn't meant to do this. They say, wow, I learned something. I am meant to do this. Now I will do it differently. And so I would love to take a bigger part in the community. I am not spending enough time in the community, but that will change.
Boomer, I appreciate the transparency, and the vision and the ambition for how you want to continue to move this ecosystem forward, one quarter, one day, one year at a time. And this has been a super fun episode for me to record, just to hear your story of being a band member, an engineer, founder, salesman, and the risks that you took to go out and start your entrepreneurial journey. Boomer, this has been a great episode. We really appreciate the insights and the presence here today.
Thank you, William. I really appreciate it. I've enjoyed talking to you.
Likewise, Boomer. Take care.